Welcome back. You're still watching the South African Morning. While Debt Rescue is predicting a bleak outlook for consumers in 2020, the country faces a shrinking economy and high unemployment rate. There could also be a downgrade from ratings agencies Moody's. Debt Rescue CEO Neil Roots joins me now via Skype to discuss the matter. Neil, thanks a lot for joining us this morning. I mean, consumers are said to be entering 2020 just buried in debt. I mean, how did this even get here?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation, but the reality is that this has come a very long time. For years, South African consumers have been struggling with their debt, and we see every year that, especially after the festive season, people are going through a very difficult time because people do not really budget for the festive season, and they feel that they have deserved it to spoil themselves and their families during the festive season, and it's become kind of an emotional spending time for people to try and recharge their batteries. And yes, the idea is good and noble, but the reality is people cannot always afford that, and then come January they find themselves in a very difficult situation because they only get their salaries at the end of January, where a lot of people got their salaries very early in December. So it's a very long time to get out on one salary. But not only that, we've seen a lot of petrol price increases, electricity price increases, interest rates, all these things, and during the past couple of years. And the reality is all these costs filters through to the prices of goods and services, and people just cannot afford to pay all those increases and the indirect effects thereof because of the fact that their salaries are not growing in line with all the price increases that we're seeing.
A lot of times we always speak about this growing middle class in South Africa. In fact, a lot of times when we're needing a good story to tell, we'd see whether from a political sphere or even private sector that make reference to this growing middle class. But the growing middle class is actually the one that is carrying a significant brunt of this debt. So the growing middle class actually can't afford to become the middle class.
Exactly, and you're 100% right. We used to talk about this in a very good light because it's very good if you have a growing middle class, and we've had one of the biggest growths in middle class that you can have in the world. But the reality is that all these price increases and the debt that's making life so difficult for people are pushing people back into poverty from the middle class, and that's very unfortunate because we're putting a lot of pressure on the middle class people. They're paying a lot of taxes, but they're not getting a lot of tax breaks in the first place. And secondly, yes, they're getting more, they're earning more money than the lower income people, but not enough to pay for all or to cover all these price increases. So yes, they're in a very difficult situation. If we look at the higher income people, they can, in most of the cases, afford these price increases where the middle class just cannot do it. So yeah, you're 100% right. We're feeling that the middle class is in some way carrying the economy, and it's an unfair pressure that we're putting on the middle class, and really not ideal.
And when do you foresee a breather, especially, I mean, we're speaking about this middle class, but really for South Africans, especially where the economy is concerned, where, the finances, the pockets are concerned? Are we ever going to have a moment where South Africans can actually breathe a sigh of relief, even if it's for a short while, especially when it comes to their financial status?
Well, we hope so. That was the intention of the National Credit Act, is to prevent people from getting into a situation where they are over indebted, and also providing them with a means to get out of debt or this debt trap once they're in debt, and that is the National Credit Act. Now the National Credit Act is probably the best piece of legislation of its kind in the world. So in that sense, we're heading into the right direction. The reality, though, is that it's going to take a very long time until we've reached a point where we can sit back and say, now we can relax and we're not that over indebted anymore. Because if you look at the stats provided by the World Bank, South Africans unfortunately just doesn't have a saving culture at all, and we use a very, very large portion of our disposable income just to service debt. Some people have said up to 75% of all the disposable income, or the average disposable income of South Africans, are used to service debt. And that's unfortunately not an ideal situation. And that's also contributing to the fact that we're in such difficult times, is the fact that retailers and everybody is making it very easy for people to buy their groceries and their basic goods on credit. Now, that just can never be a good thing. Apart from sending out the wrong message that it's right to do that, you're putting people in a very difficult situation, because once they have financed their groceries for 1 month, there's no way that they would be able to carry on the next month and the month after that without paying back the first finance that they got and taking out new finance. So in some way, the credit providers are unfortunately helping people to become over-indebted.
Yeah, we're going to leave it there for this morning, but it literally is a rude awakening in terms of South Africa and where it sits, where debt is concerned. Perhaps we need to go back to the basics of cash is king.